Hi everyone, I'm Dyan Rodriguez. I'm the Country Learning Advisor of the DEPP Learning Project here in the Philippines. So glad that you can join us. I'll be moderating the panel discussion today, and our panelists are, we're very honored to have Azmat Khan, CEO of the Foundation for Rural Development in Pakistan, Collins Obura, who is Monitoring and Evaluation Officer for Youth Alive Kenya, and Sumera Javid, who is Executive Manager of HANS Pakistan. The panelists will just briefly introduce themselves now, and then we'll make a start. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to various people in various parts of the world. I am Azmat. I work as Chief Executive Officer with Foundation for Rural Development, FRD. I have also been elected as the Provincial Chairperson of NHN, the National Humanitarian Network in Pakistan, for its chapter in KP and FATA, and I have experience of working in man-made and natural disasters in various sectors. Thank you.
My name is Collins Obura. As has been said earlier, I work for Youth Alive Kenya, which is based in Kenya, a non-state organization that advocates for and support youth participation in development process, focusing on themes like justice, human rights, health, democracy, and governance, as well as livelihood. Thank you.
Hi everybody, this is Sumera Javed. I'm working with National NGO, Health and Nutrition Development Society, HANS, as an executive manager. I'm working in the humanitarian sector since last 8 years, and I'm also looking after the humanitarian team of HANS. We're currently working on so many humanitarian projects, but I am working on multi-year humanitarian project by DEPP with HANS. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have an amazing panel today, and of course we welcome everyone who just arrived as well. So before we dive into the topic of localization of learning, let us first define what we mean by that. We are essentially looking at learning at the local level, so primarily for local and national NGOs, but also examining the involvement of beneficiaries, international NGOs, or UN agencies. So localization of learning is about examining the current level of access as regards local humanitarian staff's access to learning across the sector and opportunities to share their own learning. It is about identifying, overcoming barriers to accessing or sharing learning, identifying specific needs for learning exchange at the local level, and identifying success stories that we can build on or recommendations to take forward. But the very nature of localization is that challenges and recommendations may vary according to the context. So the question is localization of learning a standard template we can follow, or is it necessarily different according to the different contexts in which learning exchange takes place? Do our panelists have anything to add? Azmat, perhaps you could go first.
Thank you, Dyan. As far as I had been understanding the localization of learning, I agree to what you have already defined. But I want to just add a few more things into this definition. And that is, by localization of learning, we can simply do, for the simplicity of understanding, we can divide it into two parts. Number one, the learning that is generated in a local context, documented properly and shared with all the actors. This will include the local, the international, the UN agencies, and the beneficiaries. But at the same time, there is another aspect for localization, and that is a learning which has taken place in some other context, some other region of the world. We actually contextualize it to our learning. Like I had been thinking of this, that how can I clarify it? And this example is coming into my mind, that most of the people in Southeast Asia, they have rice as a major component of their diet. But here in Pakistan and Afghanistan and in this region, we have wheat as a major component. So one learning, say for example, a very good practice in managing the hot meals in Southeast Asia will need to be replicated in another context only when we change the ingredients, and thus the entire methodology will be changed. So that is, in my opinion, it is very context specific. Like one thing, one learning in one region of the world could be translated into actions in another region only if we take into consideration the context, culture, and everything over there. That is my point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Azmat, for giving those 2 points and for giving a very concrete example. So, Colin, Sumera, do you have anything to add to our working definition of localization of learning?
I agree with the definitions that have come up so far fully, but probably just to share from my end, I would want to add that it would then involve the sharing of information at a grassroots level, probably on interventions that have been taking place and with an intention to inform future interventions, as well as improving knowledge and capacities for local organization, as well as program beneficiaries. So I'm just adding that to the definitions that have been coming up, which I fully agree with. Thank you.
Well, Azmat, Colin, and Dyan, you three have already comprehensively discussed about it, but I just want to add one question. As Azmat said that he gave an example of contextualization, I would add in it that in the local context, while we are working in the humanitarian sector, there was an intervention in WASH, like the distribution of the sanitary kits to the beneficiaries. They were actually having that MHM, menstrual hygiene management things in that for the women, and that was not actually the um, intervention that brought the desired results. So we discussed it with the UNICEF. We modified that sort of sanitary kit, and we disseminated the information, and we had the community sessions on that. So this was our learning, that just to give the things to the people is not sufficient. You must let them know how to use that, and we have to see the cultural and the practices over there, whatever we are working. This is purely in the local context. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your thoughts. Indeed, there are a lot of aspects to localization of learning, and we will continue to unpack that in the discussion today. So, my first question for panelists is around local access of learning. Do you think that existing mechanisms of documenting learning are appropriate? Do we really capture and preserve all the knowledge and learning from a context? Azmat, let's start with you.
Yes, thank you, Dyan. The very nature of learning, we need to get to some clear understanding about this, that whether the existing mechanism of generation and documenting of learning are appropriate or not. This is sort of unfortunate that all human beings, they want to tell more about their success stories and impress people rather than what's wrong with their planning and what didn't work. So perhaps as a humanitarian community, we need to open up to each other more on this generation of learning or documentation of learning. Like as much time we are spending on documenting our success stories, the things that went very well, we also need to document what didn't work actually, and that is a point where we need understanding of our partners or donors, all those people who had been part of us, so that the responsibility is shared, like the responsibility for pitfalls are shared, so then we can document the knowledge like properly. like at least in my own understanding, if we consider a set of success stories as a learning, in my opinion, that is an incomplete learning unless and until we also know that what didn't work in a context and how to avoid those pitfalls and possible failures or inefficiencies in the designs of the project. So perhaps we need to improve that in documentation of our learning.
Thank you for sharing, Asma. That's a very strong point. Indeed, in our humanitarian work, we have to ensure that, history doesn't repeat itself, especially if it is a history with mistakes, no? So I'd like to ask Collins or Sumera, what are your thoughts about this? What do you think are the factors which can help encourage drawing lessons from interventions, not only success stories, but also what should what didn't work well and what other organizations should not repeat.
Maybe if I go first, I have experienced in the past that there are instances when our humanitarian staff tend to document learning with a limiting factor in terms of people want to document their perception or how they feel, their feelings, or what they have viewed while engaging, rather than documenting the actual view of the beneficiary, how the beneficiary feel it, what is their actual recommendations. Can we document it as it is, rather than molding it to how we want it to be perceived by our, by audience or by the consumer of the information. So we've seen this coming up, and I think it's an area that needs to be improved. Secondly, I've also seen that there's been a lot of limitation in terms of skills necessary for documentation. For the last couple of years, been engaging with just to give an example, the most significant change as a monitoring tool or as a method for data collection in terms of finding out aspects to do with qualitative data, and which has been giving me a lot of information, both negative and positive. But the question is, do we really understand aspects for instance, dissecting or differentiating this from just human interest stories? So the aspect of having the right skills to document, collect information, and document information for sharing is an aspect that I think needs to be enhanced so that we have our staff have the necessary skill to get the information necessary for improved learning. And again, also there's the aspect of how do we break down information so that it is easier to be consumed by our target population? I think I will leave it at that, because I want to say, if the information is not documented or broken down for better consumption, it is not going to be informed. So it's not going to help in terms of learning. So there's the aspect of having the skills to collect the information, packaging the information in the best way that is necessary for learning, and as well as delivering it in the best way. So we've got those limitations that needs to be enhanced. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. And Sumera, before you
Yes.
continue, I also want to, because the points that are coming out right now is not only in terms of matter, the substance in what we're sharing, but how we're sharing it, and now we're touching into the skills of staff. So hopefully you can also respond based on your experience, based on these three things. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dyan. I would talk about both things, the learning and the knowledge preservation and capturing, and the existing mechanisms. Like in most of the humanitarian organizations, even we have different departments. Communication department is actually monitoring, evaluation, and reporting department is actually busy with the writing reports, the progress reports, and all that stuff. We are having a missing link of learning aspect in our structures as well. The second thing is learning is actually not defined in the project document as well, because like in the new concepts like VFM, value for money, and such type of buzzwords we are using nowadays, and we are practicing those and doing the things accordingly. We need to incorporate this thing at the project design level, and we should have the team to make some manuals, tools, whatever is required for that thing. uh, there are no proper actually arrangement for enhancing learning, and the field learning as a evidence gathering or generation is not documented most of the time, because we are mostly busy with the inputs and outputs of the projects, and we are busy in all the service delivery of the things. So we need to look into these aspects as well, like and the other factor is the time duration of this humanitarian interventions, that is very less for capturing the learnings. For the humanitarian interventions, 3 to 6 months time period does not give you any, it can only tell the things that it worked or it not worked, but the main learning from that intervention is very difficult to capture in all this period of time. So these are my points, and yeah.
Thank you very much, Sumeria, for sharing that. And before we proceed, what came out from the discussion are some limitations or gaps that we see, not being able to break down the information properly, not putting what didn't work, the lack of skills, not the proper skills to be able to document properly, and as
Yeah.
well as not being able to incorporate it in project design. So very good points. Thank you. As we proceed, the second question is about knowledge and learning exchange at the local level. This means the extent to which we adequately share our own learning at the local level, whether with one another or with the global sector more broadly. So I'd like to ask Sumero, in your experience, what are the major obstacles to the exchange of learning at the local level, aside from the points that you've mentioned?
First of all, I would say that uh, the institutional knowledge of the organization within the staff and within the organization should be there, should be documented, should be in the form of reports or some, like best practicing model sort of things that should be there. And first of all, and secondly, we need to say, is the learning the priority of the organization? Like, do we have the budget allocated for such a type of learnings? Do we have the trained HR? Do we have the staff? Secondly, the language barriers are always there. Whenever you are exchanging your learnings, we are multicultural and multilingual society. And if we talk about the multi-sectoral approaches and integration of the interventions, we are sometimes stuck with these language barriers. So the language barriers, learning culture of the organizations, and the staff retention, the trained human resource, if you are not having the trained human resource or the staff is not retained after a certain period of time, that is also challenge for the learning exchange within the organizations. And the roles and the responsibilities we delegate to the field staff, that should also have this learning aspect or some thing in it, and they should be oriented well at the time of the orientation regarding the projects.
Thank you very much, Sumera. You touched on, very important prerequisites or elements on how we can make localization of learning really effective. I'd like to ask also Asmat, do you have anything to add or any specific thoughts on this?
Okay. As far as the challenges are concerned, that why the local organization and their staff have challenges in accessing the learning with other local and international and organizations and UN agencies. Number one thing is the limited resources. Like the local NGOs get we can say that they get no resources for managing learning. The local organizations are sort of considered like contractors by international NGOs and UN agencies. Like most of the focus is on the deliverables of the projects which are sort of tangible and which could be shown. So that is one challenge, that learning management, for learning management there are no specified resources. Then there exist learnings very scatteredly, like various organizations have their learnings in their context, and so many organizations have also documented their learnings. But the problem is that in this era of competition for limited resources, information and learning is also taken as a tool of competition. One organization thinks that, okay, we have got the lessons, we have learned things, so why should we share it with the broader community? Because then they will, at least we will lose that competitive advantage in the resources. Number third challenge in actually sharing the knowledge or giving broader access to the learning is some sort of capitalist approach even in our sector. This is generally I hope you people are hearing me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. The the problem with some learning is that those smaller organizations which are based at the community level and who are usually the first responders in any disasters, they do not have enough resources, and sometimes they are not part of coordination structures like clusters and those things. So a big chunk of learning is lost because those people who possess those learning, they have smaller financial value, and so the broader community do not listen to their learning. Another very important limitation or challenge is that there are some learning and learning opportunities available. Like in Pakistan, the NHN National Humanitarian Network, we are working on establishing a digital resource center where all the humanitarian actors can access the digital library and the resources. Same like this webinar in which we are participating today, very like limited people know about these opportunities, and these are the challenges in sharing knowledge with a broader audience.
Thank you very much, Azmat. You touch upon very real issues that we are facing on the ground about transparency, competition among organizations, and most especially, you talk about a dissemination strategy, you know? So at this point, I'd also like to ask Collins if he wants to add any more insights on the. Collins, are you with us? Okay.
Yes,
So
I
while,
am. Hello.
oh,
Are you
sorry.
there? I'm here. I'm here.
Sure.
Are you there? Yeah, I'll proceed. Earlier on, I had wanted to share on one thing, that in as much as sometimes we need time before we are able to document learning, and this is lengthy time, you realize that there are projects that could be short term and could actually develop learning in very short term periods. For instance, as Youth Alive Kenya, we've been engaged in governance issues and rights and justice issues in Kenya. We know the last few months we've been having national elections in Kenya. And one of the projects we engaged in was to empower the youth to take active role or active participation in the political process. And we realized that this is as short as 3 to 6 months period, we're able to document so much in terms of what was the response of the young people in terms of appreciating and taking an active role in the political process. So in as much as learning could take a lengthy period of time, but there are instances where we are able to actually derive a lot of information and learning and for sharing, which can inform future interventions in a very short period of time. So in as much as we want to take time to build up information for learning. We should keep a very keen interest and very keen attention to instances of learning that might be coming out of intervention, even at the very initial stages. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Collins, for that point, which was also raised by Sumera a while ago, the time factor. So now we go into recommendations. What are recommendations to facilitate local humanitarian staff ability to capture and share learning? Maybe we can start with Azmat and maybe building on what you said about the digital resource library being established in Pakistan.
Well, the previous recommendations on facilitating the learning and learning dissemination is number one, the partner organization like the international NGOs and the UN agencies or even the donors, they should allocate some budget for managing the organizational learning in context of the humanitarian work. And then this could happen only if there is an openness among all the stakeholders that plannings are like not perfect every time, and there always are things which we cannot foresee at the planning level. So if there are some pitfalls or some failures, the documentation of those things should not create a problem for the partners and for donors. Regarding the digital resource center, one of my colleague, I am seeing Sana Zulfikar as one of the participants here. She will also provide a complete detail of it, that at what stage it is. But this is an initiative of NHN where we are trying to provide a one window of knowledge and expertise for the consumer. The consumers, like in our digital resource centers, we do not exclude the international NGOs or the UN agencies or the beneficiaries. Whoever has an internet connection, they can actually access our digital resource center. And on that digital resource center, this is yet like a work underway. We are still working on it, and we will try to make it more user friendly, because at current time we are gathering various articles, tools, and various learnings, and we are putting it over there in the DRC. But in the long run, like once we get more audience on our DRC, we will be getting more suggestion for improving how to make it user friendly. Like there are multiple sectors of the humanitarian work, and if someone might be interested only in finding about shelters, someone might be interested only in finding about food security, and someone might be interested in some other sector. So that will be a question which is being considered right now at NHN level, or
Sure.
Central Executive Council members and a National Secretariat are trying to make it as much user friendly as possible.
Thank you very much, Azmat, for that point. Very briefly, do you have more recommendations, very specifically, Collins and Sumera?
May I come in? Or you would
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Sumera.
Okay.
Go ahead, Sumera.
Thank you. Most of the things have been discussed. I would just recommend 2-3 things that we have already existing networks like NHN, National Humanitarian Network. We have DRR Forum, Disaster Risk Reduction Forum. We have PHF platform. We just need to strengthen these networks because they all have their national as well as their provincial chapters. So we can share the learnings of the specific organization for the specific intervention within these networks that would be disseminated to the other organizations. That's the one point for the dissemination of the things. And the second is we should have the experience sharing within the organization and within the programs as well, inter and intra, sharing of the information. What we can do, uh, we can have the not every time more financial resources are required, as we are utilizing this internet facility. In our organization we have a telecast system and we are connected with 36 and 37 offices at a time. What we can do is we can have the internal meetings and the reviews regarding the programs. We can share this online, we can disseminate this information, we can invite other colleagues from the other organizations to attend as we are attending this webinar. So that would be another recommendation to share the learnings. uh, and the other thing is the project design, that's also to do with some donors things, that flexible, there should be a flexibility. It's a condition I'm putting on, but it's a recommendation that the project design should be a little flexible, that we can incorporate innovations and new things in it. Because if we would not do this, we will be restricted to the only the inputs and outputs of the projects, and we will not come up with this something that would be more useful for the future interventions. And other thing is the staff capacity. They should be capacitated in different programs, as NHN is also facilitating the organizations in doing this. So we should also see the existing mechanisms and how we can use better those mechanisms in all these learning process.
Thank you. And Collins?
Yes, I want to take, for instance, the aspect of partnerships and collaborations. Realize that most organizations have small bits of budget that can be brought in for documentation and learning. And I feel if we can take advantage of consortiums and work in partnership, and these should be strong partnerships, then we'll be able to um, to join hands together in terms of ensuring that information and learning from other partners or other organizations are shared and are used across board. Because at the end of the day, we realize that the vision of the long term of the development goals are very similar. And therefore, it becomes very important that we understand that in as much as we are in a competitive spectrum, there's a need that we share information across board. So partnerships would be a very crucial bit. I know there has been a problem of budgets in terms of at organizational level, but there's a need that as we design projects, we ensure that learning and documentation is given a very serious approach. Adam had said earlier that most development partners would want to support aspects with tangible returns. But from where I sit, I feel learning as a crucial tangible returns because it gives directions moving forward. So I feel that we should still ensure that we are able to all through give a good section for learning and sharing of learning while designing projects. Again, we also need to take into consideration the use of other channels of communication that would ensure that the little information that's available in form of learning reaches out to the biggest population possible. I'm talking of aspects to do with infographics and aspects to do with documentaries, which we have used locally, and the feedback from the beneficiaries and other partners, implementing partners, have been very positive. That there are channels that are easier to consume by the population. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Collins. And that is a good segue to the next topic, which is the heart of communications. Sumera, to start with, can you briefly outline the current involvement that beneficiaries have with project learning processes?
Well, beneficiaries are actually, while selecting the beneficiaries, we start from the assessments that they are engaged since the inception of the project. Um As it all depends how you take the program and how you run the program. As in our organization, we have very strong department of mobilization, social mobilization. What we do is we do to the communities and follow all the protocols and make the community based organizations and involve the beneficiaries at each and every point of the project interventions. After discussion and orienting the beneficiaries about the particular interventions, we take their views, whether they are satisfied, whether this thing will work for them or not. And during all these consultations with the communities in the particular areas of interventions, we actually try to incorporate all those learnings in the project designs as well, and to make the interventions very workable for them. For example, in shelter construction, while we were finalizing the shelter designs, because we, being a local organization, we emphasize on the indigenous knowledge and the low cost material and the local, skills for building the shelters, one room shelters, and these are the disaster resilient structures being formed or constructed by the low cost material. So we what we have learned in our experience, that we modified our shelter designs, we discussed that those designs in the shelter working group, and we got the approval from the working group, and we started constructing these things. So the community is because we have learned since the past 10 years in our humanitarian practices, that the community involvement is the pivotal is the pivotal thing in this, because without involving them we cannot achieve the desired results, as well as the interventions may not work for them as we have planned at our own. So this is one of the learning. Like same happened with the PATS approach while we were doing in Shangla and in KP region of Pakistan, and in Punjab and in Sindh. We came up with different ideas, with different things that we actually try to incorporate in the project by the community. Like we were working on the open defecation free villages and all that stuff. We, when we discussed the reward schemes and the other stuff, the people told us that we need this, it should be there. Like in Shangla, we actually did 2 microhydel projects as the reward scheme, because that was the learning that the community needs electricity as well with the water. Despite having the wash issues or the water and sanitation issues, they are also facing the issues of electricity. So we actually combined both of the interventions together, and it was a learning and the continuous discussions and follow-ups with the community. So this is all.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sumera. I would like to ask Asmat to add more insights on the topic, and this will be followed by Collins.
Okay, regarding the involvement of beneficiaries in generation and dissemination of learning at local level, like we have to accept some unfortunate limitations or whatever we are doing. Like when it comes specifically to humanitarian action, usually like the time is so short that the humanitarian organizations are supposed to respond quickly. So the involvement of beneficiaries in the initial stage of program are mostly their involvement in the need assessments and what are their needs, what are like just prioritizing the needs. But if we consider the early recovery and rehabilitation programs in the humanitarian sphere, then the organizations do have time to involve the beneficiaries in a deeper designing. Like Sumera has said that there are success stories, uh, there had been like chances where the beneficiaries were given a voice, but unfortunately in the humanitarian operation, the involvement of beneficiary is very limited for getting knowledge from them. Rather, the involvement is telling the beneficiaries that how can they fit the set criteria of getting assistance. But that is a segment perhaps where we as a humanitarian need to work more. Like already a lot of work had been done in terms of the sphere standards and these core humanitarian standards and other standards. But still, because we are talking of contextualizing the operations to each specific context, so we will need to work more on that and work more on involvement of beneficiaries actually in the designing and how assistance is delivered.
Sure. Thank you, Asmat. Collins?
Yeah. From my end, I want to give an example in terms of how we involve beneficiaries in learning exchange. We are running a project that involves women, and the project involves improving women social security as well as health security. And these are women in informal settlements of Kenya. What we have been able to do is to come up with women ambassadors. We call them women champions, who are basically women coming from the same settlement. And what we've achieved from this is we've been engaging these women in participatory process in the entire cycle of the project. And at learning level, it becomes very easy for us to reach out to the beneficiaries in terms of getting information, because the champions get to have a lot more capacity and help a lot in getting information both from the beneficiaries and from the partners. So we've been able to ensure that that mix of learning upwards and downwards. And I think this is one aspect that I wanted to bring on board, that making or taking the advantage or taking the opportunity available within the beneficiaries and making use of skills available within the beneficiaries enhances learning. So women champions have worked really well for us, and I wanted to bring that on board, that it's an area we can venture looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you. So a lot of takeaways from this discussion, and I think good points like vertical, horizontal flow of information or learning, and then inter and intra flow of information. Really good points. Now, as we proceed further, let's look at the other end of the spectrum, the international level. Some of you already mentioned a few points on this, but what do you think are the roles of international NGOs, UN agencies in facilitating learning generation and dissemination at a local level? Asmat, do you want to add points on this?
Yes, well, if I'm understanding it correctly, the question now is that how the international organization play their role in facilitating the learning of the local organizations. So my point, my stake on this is that yes, the international organizations and the UN agencies, due to their size and their outreach and their broader involvement in other areas, they do have a big accumulation of learning with them. However, there is still a need for more openness, and actually I will again refer to my initial inputs on the quality of learning that is being documented. The international and the UN agencies, they are also forced, like the locals, to document more of their success stories. So for like we by we I mean the local NGOs, the international NGOs, and the UN agencies. We all need to take a bit stronger position on this, that we will document the success stories, but we will also document the failures. Then another point is that many times we skip some learning. We cannot capture it, and that is a concept of time poverty. Very few staff members of the national or the local humanitarian organizations are supposed to carry out so many things. So, in those places where the international organizations or the UN agencies are partners with the national or local organizations, they should be a bit more generous, at least in in giving costs of the staff. Like, say, for example, a national organization is involved in distribution of food, and they are given people only to distribute the food. This, they, like, those people who are distributing food all the day, and they are maintaining the queues and documenting the how many bags of what went to whom. If we ask them that, okay, you start at 8 a.m. in the morning and you carry on distribution till whatever time in the evening, and then after documenting your process, you also document the learnings, that will be demanding of them too much. So the international and the UN agencies should consider this aspect in their partnership, that whenever they are agreeing on a project with their partners, enough human resource should be given so that the documentation and dissemination takes place. And then, some colleagues have shared it here in the comments, like the Kaya Connect, the Digital Resource Center of NHN, this DEPP circle of learning, they should be like sort of advertised or promoted among the humanitarian community, so that when the users increase for information, those people who are managing those information, they will be able to better arrange it according to the needs of the users.
Thank you very much, Azmat, for these points. So let's turn to Sumera. Can you share any experience of success or challenges in this area? Hello, Sumera.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll just add two things to the Azmat discussion. He has actually holistically described everything, but then I will come to the question you just asked me: the role of the NGOs, UN and INGOs in the facilitation. They need to be done two things. The UN and INGOs needs to be flexible in their program designs, one thing, and the other thing is the overhead cost to the local organization is very less. If the UN is giving any project to the INGOs, the overhead cost of the INGO would be more than the overhead cost of this NGO in their budgetary arrangements. I'll come to the experience of success and challenges in the area. I actually, as I already mentioned, that we have certain interventions in the current project, and and also we try to learn from the previous experiences. Uh, the best thing we faced in this consortium working setup, that while working, we are actually working on the multi-sectoral approaches sometimes. um, we got very good successes. You may say that success stories regarding the shelter designs and wash schemes from the communities. And when we discussed all the challenges, all the additions by the communities, and all the stuff to the our donors, to the UN, they were very flexible, and they were like, okay, fine, we will go with the recommendations being told by the community. For example, in one of our FSL interventions, like we were doing in the food security livelihoods, we found we had an intervention that was a big failure, but after that we learned from that, because I'm also sharing the learnings that could not work for us, like the cotton seeds we introduced in the southern Punjab, but somehow or the other we couldn't get the expected results as we expected. So we discussed it with the FAO, and we actually terminated the seeds and we introduce new interventions and new, you know, seeds for that area. So these are the successes, and this is sometimes very challenging while talking to the beneficiaries about the certain intervention, and we want them to, you know, behave like as we want them to adopt the same as we are telling them. So my point of view that, or UN or the INGOs or the donors, they should be flexible in their program designs and to welcome these sort of ideas, because nowadays people are more aware. There are other networks, there are, government is also working a lot on all these things, so people do talk to each other to disseminate the existing or the knowledge they get from the others. So we need to have some sort of flexible setup in our, you know, projects and
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much, Samara. I'd like to ask Colin if he would like to add points on this.
Yes, probably just one more point. I realize most of the things have been mentioned. I want to bring on board the aspect of policy development from the international NGOs and UN agencies. You realize that aspects in terms of financing for program designs, when you talk of an issue like admin, you realize that admin have like they have like a policy on how much finances would go into admin and such like issues. But when it comes to learning, it's at the discredit of whoever is designing, whoever is evaluating the design of proposals. I would like to see a situation where they come up with policies that would actually dictate what fraction would want to see go into learning, because these are very crucial areas that we do want to go and see untouched. So I think if it could be a policy issue, then we would find it very easier moving forward to ensure that learning is not ignored during design and even during implementation. But still, I still feel INGOs and UN agencies can support a lot in terms of dissemination of learning, because you realize that there are lots of conventions, a lot of meetings that are being held, and if this information can be shared out in good time, then implementing organizations are in a position to package their learning and prepare the learning for dissemination in all these conventions and meetings that are being organized by INGOs and UN agencies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Collins, for that point. We will be going through the next few minutes to look into the Zoom group chat and see if there are prevailing comments or questions. The first one is we did receive a comment about more information on the digital platform in Pakistan. And we thank Sana for sharing that link. I hope that you can see that in the chat box. There's
Yeah.
also a suggestion about linking it with the Kaya Connect of the Humanitarian Leadership Academy. There's a point here from Adele, and maybe we will have time to request panelists to comment on that matter, saying that community-based DRR mechanism in the form of disaster management committees developed by different INGOs could have sustainability after the withdrawal of NGOs. So what do you think, what are your comments on this matter in terms of sustaining, learning? Maybe we can start with Collins.
Yes, I'll go ahead. In terms of sustainability, my take is we do not want to design projects without a serious sustainability after exit point. For instance, in as much as most development partners do not want to partner with the government, but realize that the government remains the entity with the sole responsibility of service provision. Therefore, if we work in isolation of the government, it's not very easy to ensure sustainability. So I would suggest that, and I would advise that we ensure that as we design our programs, we need to look at the government strategy. is it in line with the government's strategy, so that we are supplementing the government's work rather than working in isolation. I believe this will ensure sustainability, because then the government will have a mandate to continue with the implementation even after the exit plan or the exit of the development partners. So my take is actual partnership, not just with the government, but also with other development partners, and assurance of or ownership of the beneficiaries into the program. Thank you.
Thank you. And in the interest of time, I also want to proceed. There's a question or comment in terms of cultural analysis, and I want to direct this to Sumera, who mentioned that. So, if social institutions that already exist in communities can be identified, it means cultural analysis. If we use cultural organized social institutions, it will be more sustainable. That's from Adil. So, what are your thoughts on this, Sumera?
There should be community learning forums as well to have the learnings captured from that side. I would actually reading the Adil Bacha's comment, uh, that the community, that we need to capacitate the communities that we usually do in keeping the indigenous knowledge and the techniques intact with them, and because they are the people who are actually making the things for themselves. So this also covers the sustainability aspect of their interventions. So all these things are interrelated and actually supplementing and complementing each other. So there should be a holistic mechanism to capture the community-based learnings and the organization learnings, and the sharing mechanism should be, um, uh, there for the dissemination of such type of learnings.
Thank you for that. There's also a question whether the organization's culture and learning in general affect how learning at the local community happens. And this has been, mentioned a while ago. I'd like to ask Asma to comment on this and how can the leadership be involved to promote the culture of learning at a local level? Asma?
That is really an interesting and a very good question, that how learning at the local and community happens and is shared. And no doubt, yes, this is the not only the organizational culture in a specific humanitarian organization, but rather the broader culture at an area. This affect this learning management. I will try to clarify it with an example, that at certain cultures, one aspect might be thought important, and so in the learning management they might focus on that one aspect. But in other cultures, another aspect might be necessary, and they might want to know more about that culture. So the leadership of organizations, they need to be sensitive to this need of documentation of learning, where the users, like, that whenever they are managing the learning, they are documenting or generating knowledge, they should also look into it from the shoes of the users, that okay, in this context number one, this aspect X or Y is important, but in context number 3 or 5, and other aspect of X or Y or Z would be more important. So the leadership, not only of the organizations, but the leadership at the community level, those people who are influential at the community level, they should be taken on board, and they should be involved in this. And I hope that I have answered the question of Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Asmat. That's a good point. Not only leadership at the civil society level, but at the community as well to be engaged. So thank you very much to our panelists, Asmat, Colin, Sumera, for your time, and most especially to our participants who took the time to join us. We hope that you learned a lot from the discussion as much as I did. And for sure, colleagues will share the documentation as well as important links. We encourage you to also participate in the next webinar on November 8th, localization to contextualization, and just watch out on this by checking out our website. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.